Right, we're quite international today, including Leicester, as well as Tokyo and London. And I will just introduce our moderator, and then I will leave it to him to handle the rest of things. So our moderator today is Jack Goodman, who is a senior journalist with the BBC World Service. And he has plenty of experience of fact-checking, having fact-checked various elections in the UK, US, and India. And his reporting, his investigation into a COVID miracle drug won the Royal Society of Medicine Prize for exposing fake news. And he's continued to work over the last year on programs relating to fake news, deep fakes, and so on. So he's very much the right person, I think, to be moderating this discussion. So I'm going to hand over to Jack at this point to take over.
Thank you very much, Jason. Delighted to be here. Establishing facts, it's a really brilliant and important time to have this talk, a year of so many hugely important elections. There'll be many politicians making bold claims about their records, and fact-checking journalists will be checking those claims. During elections, times of tension, uncertainty is a time when disinformation, misinformation can spread easily, and people can take advantage of that uncertainty. I'm sure we'll hear a bit about that later. But also at a time of many conflicts around the world, establishing facts on the ground through verified social media footage is also so vital. And we also have the emergence of new technologies, generative AI, that can distort reality, mimic people's voices and faces, and create disinformation at scale. And I'm joined today by two wonderful speakers for you. Second, we'll have Maiko Ujihara, who is a professor in Graduate School of Law and the School of International and Public Policy and Assistant Vice President for International Affairs at Hitotsubashi University in Japan. She's on the steering committee of the Japan Fact-Checking Center, extremely relevant for today's talk, and has written widely on influence operations, disinformation, international relations, and democracy. I'm really looking forward to hearing you speak. But first is Eliot Higgins, a journalist and founder of Bellingcat, an organization that's pioneered the use of open source investigation in the search for accountability, particularly in war. He's held research positions at the Atlantic Council, King's College London, and UC Berkeley, and is the author of the book, We Are Bellingcat. So, Eliot, please take us away.
Hi, thanks very much for having me on. I will just share my presentation. So Bellingcat is an organization I founded in 2014. We're best known for the work that we do on open source investigation, which is using publicly available material to investigate a range of topics. That's really a field that has emerged thanks to the emergence of smartphone technology since 2007 and the spread of the use of social media. So that has really created a network of detectors, people filming, photographing, seeing things and sharing it online. And it's that network of information that we've been exploring in our own work. So I started doing this about 12 years ago now as a hobby more than anything. My background was not in investigation or journalism. It was completely different. I used to do a lot of admin work and stuff like that, but I had a really keen interest in what was happening with the Arab Spring. And I saw there was a lot of videos and photographs being shared from places like Egypt and Libya and Syria that were being broadly ignored, either by the media or policymakers or anyone who could actually make any use of them. And one of the big reasons for this is a lack of trust. No one seems to know how to verify if these videos are true or not. And there was still a reliance on traditional forms of reporting, in particular, traditional conflict reporting. Part of that distrust was based on how media organizations had been burnt in the past by people pretending to be people they weren't and then being cited by those media organizations. So in the context of the Arab Spring, there was one account called Gay Girl in Damascus, which claimed to be giving the facts of what was happening in the ground on Syria. That actually turned out to be a white guy in America. And that was someone who was very widely cited in various newspapers, and it caused a lot of embarrassment. But I could see that if you examine these videos and photographs, if you use a process called geolocation, which is using points of interest in those videos and photographs to compare to satellite imagery and find exactly where they were taken. You could actually verify this stuff. And that was a kind of start for a very early journey for me. I started a blog that was called the Brown Moses blog, named after a Frank Zappa song I liked. And it wasn't much to look at, but it was where I kind of put my thoughts. And I had no intention of this being something that would eventually turn into what it is today. It was really just for me to write about those things I found interesting. But over the next 2 years, I built an audience of people who are interested in what I was finding, they were interested in the methodologies behind open source investigation. And I had some significant stories I discovered. In early 2013, I had used YouTube videos posted by Syrian rebel groups to show they were receiving weapons smuggled in by Saudi Arabia through Jordan, and that ended up on the front page of the New York Times. In August 2013, I found a lot of information about the chemical weapon attacks that had happened on August 21st, information that traditional media sources were unable to find. So by early 2014, I decided to launch a new website called Bellingcat, which I launched using Kickstarter. And it was launched on July 14th, 2014. And 3 days later, Malaysian Airlines flight MH17 was shot down over eastern Ukraine. And that really became a massive catalyst, both for my own work and the work of Bellingcat, but the open source investigation field more broadly. Not just in terms of journalism, which it's often kind of most well known for, but areas around justice and accountability, for example. So what happened after the immediate aftermath of MH17 being shot down is a community formed online, and I started identifying people in that community who seemed to know what they were doing in terms of investigating using these kinds of images. But in parallel to that, and in parallel to so many things in the past, like chemical weapon use in Syria, there was this kind of alternative media ecosystem that emerged that really denied what was happening. They said that Russia hadn't shot down MH17, that Assad hadn't used chemical weapons. And I started becoming quite fascinated with these communities because whilst open source investigation is a really big part of the work that we do at Bellingcat, a lot of it is really about community. It's about building communities, drawing on those communities, and what those communities can do in terms of resilience against disinformation being produced by these alternative media ecosystems and by state actors. So today I'll take you through a few examples of how this can be useful for gathering information and being resilient. So this next slide is a screenshot on the left from a database we created in 2014. And early in the conflict in Ukraine, there was a lot of, back in 2014, there was a lot of confusion about who was actually involved with the fighting. Russia was claiming they had no involvement, that it was separatist forces, that the military equipment being seen had been captured by these separatist forces from Ukraine. But as we investigated MH17, we're finding a lot of online evidence of other things. So on the top right, you're seeing a armored vehicle. It's from a video that was geolocated inside Russia, and it was being transported. A few months later, it was seen in the bottom right-hand video, which was filmed in Ukraine and again geolocated. It's the same vehicle, it has the same damage on it, it has the same markings, it has lots of other details that demonstrate it's the same vehicles. And this data set we were able to build, these geolocations, was really done because there was a large community digging through this content that was being shared on all sorts of social media platforms and kind of filtering it into the discussions that were happening on social media platforms like Twitter. So by taking those discussions and turning it into a data set, we are able to actually identify patterns and information like this. In this example from Syria, in 2015, Russia started bombing Syria. And on the Russian Ministry of Defense YouTube channel, they started posting videos like this that showed what they claimed were the bombing of ISIS facilities inside Syria. Now, they posted many, many videos like this, and people started geolocating them on social media. So using Google Earth satellite imagery to find out exactly where these were taken. I saw that activity, and using another platform called CheckDesk, we started adding each of these videos onto that platform, and that could be then used in a chat style interface for people to discuss the videos and establish exactly where they were taken. Now, this was very important because what it actually showed us is that Russia, by its own maps and its own claims about ISIS territory, was not actually bombing ISIS at all. It was bombing other groups in other areas, and that supposed ISIS facility that I showed you in the last video was actually a set of grain silos that they'd bombed. So they were not only lying about who they were bombing, they were also actually providing evidence of potential war crimes that, if it wasn't for this community coming together and for them being directed through platforms like this, wouldn't have been possible to establish. Another way these communities can be useful is when you have a big question that's quite simple, but you need to ask it to a lot of people. So Europol started a campaign called Stop Child Abuse, Trace and Object. And in that campaign, they started taking items that featured in child abuse imagery and asked the public to identify them. These were only images where they felt they had no more leads. There were no more opportunities to find anything about these photographs before they were filed away and forgotten about forever. But thanks to this community, it was possible to identify them. When this campaign started, we actually started promoting this to our own community, encouraging them to get involved. And it was possible to identify many, many objects. Now, this is a case where if you're one individual, this would be very, very difficult to do because you're talking about objects from lots of different countries that, unless you're a resident of that country, it would be very unlikely for you to be able to identify what these were. But because we were able to amplify this to a very large community, it was a very simple question as well. What is this object? It was possible to identify a lot of this stuff. In one case, we had an image Europol shared that showed a bedroom somewhere in the world. And that was this picture was literally the only clue we had. But because this was shared with a large community, within a week, someone had said, I've been to that room, it's a hotel. And they gave the name of the hotel and the website of the hotel. And it was possible to find a picture on the website of the hotel, which you can see on the right here, that's virtually identical to the picture on the left. The only changes is that they've changed the bed sheets. So this is something that if you were doing it, with just one or two people would be impossible. But thanks to this connection we have on social media, we can share this with a very large number of people. People often ask about how many volunteers Bellingcat has, and that's a difficult question to answer. And this diagram explains why. This is really how Bellingcat is laid out and coordinates. So right at the center, we have the core Bellingcat team. That's our actual staff. We have 40 staff members. They're responsible for various tasks, including investigation and publishing. We then have another layer of contributors and collaborators, and these can be individuals, organizations, people from all kinds of different backgrounds and experiences. So in the past, that's been news organizations like Spiegel, The Guardian, The New York Times. It's been investigative groups like Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, Forensic Architecture. It's been people with specific knowledge of weapon systems or naval tracking or things like that. Then we have a third layer, which are trained volunteers. So we have a volunteer community we call the Global Authentication Project. These are volunteers that we've trained to do geolocation. We have shown those volunteers not only how to do geolocation, but to look after their own mental health because they are dealing with conflict imagery. And those first three layers are what we can plan around. So when we're designing a project, that's what we have a degree of control over. Then you have the three outer layers in yellow. So you have the Bellingcat community. So that is considered to be people who follow us closely on social media, in particular Twitter, but also we have a Discord server that has about 28,000 members. And that Discord server is very useful for identifying stories and leads and just kind of crowdsourcing investigative answers that we're looking for. And often what we'll do is we'll see the community are looking into something that we're not looking at inside the core team, but we can then bring that into the core team and turn that into investigations. So most recently, we've done that with an investigation into an oil spill off the coast of Trinidad and Tobago. And that's allowed us to identify who was behind the oil spill, show that it was part of Venezuelan oil smuggling operations, who owned the various vessels involved. You then have the layer, which is the wider online open source investigation community. So those are really just anyone who's involved with open source investigation, who generally are aware of Bellingcat, but aren't directly engaged with our work. And then you have the wider social media communities, which is pretty much everyone else. But that's the kind of layer you engage when you're looking at the Trace and Object Stop Child Abuse campaign. So in our work, what we're trying to do is engage all those different layers in different ways, depending on the investigation. And within that, you're also creating resilience, because not only are we kind of drawing information in from those communities, but we're also teaching them how to do open source investigation. Leading by example, we give training workshops. We've trained around 8,000 people. We give talks like this. We have a variety of activities to create that knowledge within the community, because that can become very useful. And that was particularly useful at the start of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia in 2022. These are just a small selection of many, many TikTok videos and other social media posts that showed Russian truth movements just prior to the invasion. Now, these are just ordinary people who have seen interesting things happening in front of them and share them on social media for likes and reshares. But what this actually creates is a massive data set. This is a map produced by an organization called the Center for Information Resilience. They're similar to Bellingcat. And what they started doing at the start of the conflict and just prior to the invasion is geolocating all of these videos. So each of these green dots that you can see is a separate social media post that has been geolocated and was posted in the week before the invasion. And what that actually shows us are the troop movements just prior to the invasion. And this was at a point when President Zelensky was denying there would be an invasion. There were contradictory claims from policymakers. But by looking at this data, we could actually see the reality of the situation. We could see the troop movements happening in near real time. And you can actually go to this map. It's a live map. You can click on the links. You can see the videos and the photographs yourself. So you can, if you want to double check the geolocation, you're free to do that as well. And it creates a useful data set that allows the conflict and the build-up to the conflict to be tracked. Now, this video was posted online by the Donetsk People's Republic. I'll just let you watch it for a moment. See, you're probably thinking that doesn't look like much between, there's gunfire, there's some grass and trees, but not much else. But the video was posted on Telegram by the Donetsk People's Republic, and it had a very lengthy explanation to what it showed. And they were claiming that these were Polish-speaking saboteurs who were working as mercenaries on the side of the Ukrainians, attacking a chlorine storage tank at a sewage treatment plant as an attempt to create a chemical incident. Now, just prior to the invasion, this was a narrative, this idea of a chemical weapons attack or incident of some sort was a narrative that was being pushed very hard from the Russian side. And this post was made on February 18th, along with that video. Now, the one mistake they made is that they didn't realize that unlike other social media platforms like Twitter or Facebook, when you post a video on those platforms, it strips all of the metadata. But when you post it on Telegram, it does not strip the metadata. And inside the file, you can actually find all this information. And this is just a very small selection of this information. It's added to files when you edit them in Adobe Premiere Pro. It's basically the blueprint to how a file has been edited. So it tells you everything you need to know about this video. So first of all, it was created and modified on the 8th of February, which is 10 days before the event was reportedly took place. So that was the first issue. We can also see in the project path, it was created in a folder that also had a date from 10 days previously. We can see it was edited in video editing software, and this one stood out in particular, Pantry Ingredients File Path. So this file name of an MP4 file leapt out at me straight away because I download lots of videos from YouTube using various pieces of software, and generally the default file name is the name of the YouTube video it's downloading. So I put that into YouTube and immediately came up with this. So this is a video from 10 years ago of a firing range in Finland, and it has a number of explosions, and I'll just play the video to you now. So what they'd done is actually used the explosions in this video and copy and pasted them into their fake video. And all of this information was basically the blueprint to how they had forged this video. And what was very important about this is it was debunked very, very quickly indeed. In less than an hour, everything about this video had been found out. The source of the explosions, the fact that it was 10 days before the actual incident occurred. And that was very important. It happened because there was already a community of people engaged with the topic of Ukraine and open source investigation since 2014, because that's when Bellingcat started investigating what was happening in Ukraine. They acted as kind of the white blood cells reacting to this piece of disinformation. And because it was debunked so quickly, those media ecosystems that would generally believe this kind of thing didn't really kind of absorb this piece of information because they already had seen it being debunked. And that's quite a handy preventative measure because it prevents disinformation from entering media ecosystems, because once they're in those ecosystems, it's very hard to convince the people who participate in them that something like this is a fake. So we also had communities like this and web and social media accounts who were geolocating videos. And there were all kinds of accounts set up, and they would find a video, drone footage or a claim or allegation, and then they would geolocate that. Now that became very useful for us because this was producing a data set of videos coming from this conflict. And we have a platform called Atlas that allows us to create individual basic database cards for each of these videos. And our trained volunteer community then verifies geolocations. And we then re-verify those geolocations with our staff members, and we put them onto a map at ukraine.bellingcat.com. So the ukraine.bellingcat.com map shows hundreds of incidents of civilian harm since the start of the conflict. It's a downloadable data set, so anyone can come and download it if they want to use it. We know it's being used by a wide range of humanitarian organizations and organizations working on legal accountability. And it's really an opportunity to take this kind of somewhat chaotic kind of community efforts that's happening on social media and put it into a process that verifies the data set and turns it into a more accessible and useful data set that can be relied on by various humanitarian actors. It also creates a historical record of the conflict, which is also something that's very important. And it ensures that this data is searchable in the future. I did a lot of work on Syria, where there's millions of videos and photographs, and that has been archived, but it's been archived without geolocation information in many cases, which makes it a lot more difficult to search for. So what we're trying to do is simplify the accessibility of this information and make sure that it is reliable information. So another piece of work that's very important to us at the moment is, aside from our editorial output, we're also working on developing open source investigations specifically for use in legal accountability. So these are investigations that can be used in courtrooms successfully. It started 5 years ago with our Yemen project, where we worked with the Global Legal Action Network to develop a process that investigated Saudi-led coalition bombardment in Yemen, particularly those causing civilian harm. We then took that and we started applying that in 2022 to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And we have ongoing investigations at the moment that show this. We have run various things such as mock admissibility hearings to test our process and to see if it actually would work in a real legal environment. There's still very little actual work that's been done using this kind of evidence in court. So a lot of what we're doing is testing it before it reaches court to make sure it will actually work. And that's been a very useful experience for us. And it's also allowed us, with the Global Legal Action Network, to produce reports for legal practitioners so they understand these issues ahead of time, rather than learn about them in the process of actually building cases. We've also focused a lot on media literacy because, as I mentioned before, one thing that's really effective to counter disinformation is having people who already know how to counter disinformation, and quickly respond to it. And that worked with Ukraine because people had followed our work on Ukraine for years. But there's lots of different types of disinformation. Often disinformation is only recognized when it becomes a problem that really reaches mainstream media. But there's stuff that happens on a much smaller scale every day. And I am a strong believer that education, starting at secondary level and moving into university level, is very, very important for everyone in terms of actually building resilience against disinformation. And it's not enough to teach young people that the truth, or what the truth is, but we need to teach them that there's an impact from finding the truth, because the risk is, if we don't do that, we're just creating another community that is a bubble online, arguing with other communities online, and really there's no real impact, and that will just increase the kind of cynicism and distrusting government and media that fuels the spread of disinformation. So that's the work of Bellingcat. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Eliot, on the power and influence of the Bellingcat community and the increasing centrality of digital evidence. That was fascinating. Professor Ichihara, over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So let me share my slides. So thank you very much for your introduction, and well, I'm really well, honored to participate in this event, wonderful event, especially together with Mr. Eliot Higgins, who we all look up to in this community. So I'm really honored to be here. So my name is Maiko Ichihara, Professor of International Relations at Hitotsubashi University, Japan. And I have been doing research on democracy support, democracy and human rights diplomacy, as well as authoritarian influence operations, especially China's influence operations in Japan. So from that perspective, I would like to talk about authoritarian disinformation and narratives in Japan today. I actually started doing research on China's influence operations in Japan in 2019. And back then, there was still a very weak interest in this field. And there was even a sentiment that the Japanese society is pretty resilient to authoritarian influence operations. And that was partially because disinformation was not so much issue in the Japanese society. But over the time, there has been an increased, cases of disinformation as well as interest. So there has been coverage of disinformation in newspaper articles, literally daily these days. The tide of disinformation in Japan started, I would say, in 2016, though, at the time of the US presidential elections. We also had misinformation case about healthcare from a website, aggregator website called Welk. And so that was when the society started talking about disinformation and misinformation. But that was mostly considered, especially disinformation was mostly considered as something foreign to the Japanese society. And into the 2020 and 21, with the spread of COVID-19, we started seeing misinformation related to COVID-19 in Japan, and also reports about all those kinds of misinformation and disinformation related to COVID-19 all over the world in Japanese newspapers. And it was really in 2020, though, that the Japanese society sort of woke up to the fact that the Japanese society itself is under attack of influence operations from outside actors. That was when Russia started spreading disinformation about Ukraine, which was actually widely spread in Japan as well. Well, we had those apparently government-related actors of Russia and trolls from Russia. But in addition to it, those Chinese trolls, as well as Japanese conspiracy theorists, helped spread those Russian disinformation. And so that impacted the Japanese society largely, especially at the time, in the beginning of the Russian aggression of Ukraine, in a way that the Japanese newspapers mostly believed that NATO's eastern expansion was the cause for Russian aggression, and so there was some reason for Russia to invade Ukraine, which was huge problem for the Japanese newspapers to write as such. And last year, 2023, was even a more chaotic year for Japan, with seeing this disinformation spreads about the discharge of the treated water. It is that it is about those water which was used in the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant, and its discharge after it was purified to the level that it's scientifically considered to be fine to be discharged. But despite those the backing, scientific backing from both the Japanese government, foreign governments, as well as IAEA, there's spread disinformation that this treated water is actually nuclear contaminated, and this disinformation came mainly from China. And together with a massive number of phone calls from China, which intended to irritate and stop operations of Japanese municipalities, restaurants, schools, libraries, embassies, and so forth, the Japanese society finally really fully realized that we have to prepare for disinformation and have to take some actions to protect the society from disinformation. And further into the current era, disinformation and manipulated information about the Gaza conflict has been still spreading very extensively in the Japanese discursive space. And thinking about the sources of disinformation, there are apparently not only foreign actors, but also domestic actors operating in this field. We have those CCP and Russian government-related actors, and CCP media, as well as Russian government-related media. But diaspora media in Japan are utilized to spread their propaganda. And as I said, trolls are operating in the Japanese discursive space. And, apparently, just as the case in other societies, one of the interesting things is that those Chinese trolls are spreading information from the mainland China via Twitter or Facebook, although Twitter and Facebook are supposedly being banned in the mainland China. They also utilize domestic actors in Japan, and they actually synchronize in some ways with those domestic actors that spread disinformation in the Japanese society. We have influencers, in Japan, who are some of whom are former politicians, current journalists or intellectuals, and so forth. And they sometimes spread disinformation to attack some of the political parties or politicians in Japan. But sometimes they spread disinformation or propaganda from Russia or China. We also have political parties that will spread disinformation, and also PR companies, both domestic and foreign, that are operating in the discursive space in the information ecosystem. As a scholar of international relations, my main focus has been on authoritarian actors outside of the country, and how and why they have been targeting Japan for influence operations. And I would say that there are two purposes which are intertwined with each other. One is to destabilize and polarize Japan, and another is to drive a wedge between Japan and the country's security partners, particularly the United States, South Korea, and Taiwan. Polarization is actually one of the factors that are utilized by authoritarian actors when they try to influence other societies. So they try to, expand the polarization in those target societies by spreading extreme sort of information, both disinformation and manipulated information. But in the case of polarization in Japan, we actually have relatively weak populist tendencies and polarization in the society. It's only relative to other countries, and we do have populistic politicians or polarization in the society, but relatively weak compared to other countries. And there are some reasons. One is that the Japanese people, especially since the end of the World War II, have been shying away from political discussions in the public sphere. So it's quite rare to, it's somewhat, still not popular to have political discussions, widely in the public space. Secondly, they also have the tendency to dislike retweeting and liking other people's tweets. And so even when there's disinformation spreading over Twitter, for example, those disinformation spreads relatively slowly compared to in other countries. And thirdly, the economic gap is relatively restrained in the Japanese society compared to other countries. And so, in a relative term, there's slightly less economic frustration in the society. However, we do have a serious divide in the society, which is over security issues. And especially the Constitution, Japanese Constitution, which was created after the end of the World War II, has this article called Article 9, which deprives Japan of the warfighting capabilities, and that has been the cause of division. And this constitution has been causing this battle between pro-US and anti-US or anti-Japanese government factions. On the left side, we have pacifists. They have a very long tradition of being very influential in the society. During the Cold War time, they represented the majority view. And they claim that Japanese constitution is a pacifist constitution, and so it has to be well protected. And we had multiple wars in the Asian region during the Cold War period, which includes, for example, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and so forth. And all the time they sought to avoid the fear of entrapment. So they always opposed to the expansion of Japan's security role in the Asian region. They also have distrust in the Japanese government, partially because they have this sentiment that they were under this a ladder of repression during the two world wars, where civil liberties were deprived, and so they always wanted to shrink the role of the Japanese government. But at the same time, they held this distrust in the Japanese government because the Japanese government has been changing the interpretation of the Constitution and particularly Article 9, in a way that we can understand that the self-defense force that we have is constitutional. And they also have a skepticism over about the U.S. And U.S.-Japan alliance. On the right-hand side, we have conservatives who care about national defense, especially. And for them, especially into the 21st century, where China rose, Chinese power has expanded, and China has been taking aggressive measures in the Japan Sea over the Senkaku Island issues and in other areas, including the Taiwan Strait. They consider that constitutional amendment would be necessary for Japan to really deter China, so that we can protect our country. And what they seek is they seek to avoid the fear of abandonment by the U.S. Because U.S.-Japan alliance is the only alliance that we have for our security. And so they, in addition to strengthening the U.S.-Japan alliance and cooperation, they also seek to strengthen security cooperation with other like-minded countries like India, Australia, South Korea, and the Philippines. They have somewhat stronger trust in the Japanese government in the U.S. And so these two camps ends up, having a battle over those security issues. And what's problematic when it comes to in relations with disinformation is that, for example, right now there has been massive information campaign from Chinese-related actors that shows disinformation, manipulated information on Israel-Gaza conflict, especially showing pictures of children being killed and protests going against Israel and the United States. And most of those information is actually true information, but they show those information as anti-U.S. information in a way that they claim that U.S. is responsible for this Israel attack against Gaza. And so we have to stop the U.S. We have to fight against the U.S. We cannot trust the U.S. So they convey that kind of narratives. And facing those disinformation and manipulated information, the conservatives actually strengthens anti-pacifist sentiment, which so although those conservatives are not the main target of influence operations from authoritarian countries, but they are influenced in a way to decrease the trust level to the leftists, which strengthens, which deepens the divide in the country. So, as I said, Israel-Hamas conflict, has been utilized for information manipulation in the Japanese discursive space, especially by China-related actors right now, which tries to show that Israel is attacking Palestine unilaterally, and it avoids mentions on Hamas' initial attack and taking hostages. And its purpose is to show that the U.S. is responsible for this conflict. And the problem here is that because those are not necessarily clear-cut disinformation, so it's hard to tell how much information is actually can be legitimized, and that complicates the situation because it's really hard to tell that if it's disinformation, then we can claim that this person or this actor is in charge, but this manipulated information is problematic. And also, well, it's pretty difficult to tell how much influence they have onto the Japanese society. But massive inflow of pictures and videos continues, so which is alarming. Another alarming well, side of the information space is that there has been massive information laundering going on amongst China-related actors and Russia-related actors. There has been cross-references to the articles among various CCP media outlets that have been spreading news in the Japanese language. And some of them actually create aggregator sites and spread news from those CCP media too. One example is this one, AFPBB, which which spreads interpreted news from AFP, but actually this AFPBB is different from AFP, and they have news article delivery contracts with CCP media. Well, many of the CCP media as well. And I conducted correspondence analysis on terms and information sources in news articles, which had the term contaminated water from AFPBB from 2008 to 2023. And it turned out that almost all the news sources, almost all the news with the term contaminated water were how can I say? Well, were originally from AFP until March 2021. But from April 13, 2021, most of the news with the term contaminated water that have been spread from disseminated from AFPBB became those news that came from CCP state media. And this April 13, 2021 was the day when the Japanese government showed its intention to release the treated water from the Fukushima area. So there was a very intentional change in terms of the information source and the information source that they used. And as I said, well, we have to be concerned that liberal intellectuals are sort of targeted by those influence operations. And so this is one of the examples of correspondence analysis that I conducted on articles of what's considered to be having the content of whataboutism related to Russia's aggression in Ukraine. So, which means that those articles criticized Russia, but at the same time they said like, well, but there would have been some issues with the NATO expansion of toward the east, or Ukraine should have been actually negotiated with Russia better, or those whataboutism which claims that both sides had problems. And I tried to see well, what kind of adjectives they use in those articles. And this result shows that they use negative adjectives and positive adjectives, both of them. But when they write about NATO and West, they used slightly more negative adjectives compared to positive adjectives. So although they themselves think that they are judging both the Russian side and the Ukrainian side in a fair way, but probably unintentionally they were using more negative adjectives about the West, which shows that they are actually influenced by those negative information. And one of the biggest problems right now in the Japanese society is that there is an increased anti-China sentiment and anti-pacifist sentiment, I would say. although we have to be aware that authoritarian influence operations is conducted in the Japanese society, and we have to conduct research, and we have to conduct fact checks, and media literacy training, and counter narrative creation, and all that. But we have to differentiate the Chinese state actors and those who are in this influence operations, and those average people who are not in relations with influence operations. And the average people should not be targeted of hatred. And labeling against each other between pacifists and conservatives is one of the serious problems. And pacifists are increasingly considered as pro-China. And most vivid case is over Okinawa. So we have to be mindful that if we are serious about securing the country, then we have to avoid labeling, even if we increase research on disinformation and influence operations by authoritarian actors. Governmental efforts are going on. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Defense, Ministry of Internal Affairs, and Communication have been upgrading their research and policies on anti-disinformation, but there has not been enough yet. Private actors are also expanding research, but still it's not enough. And especially one of the problems is that there's a weak interdisciplinary approach where international relations scholars talk about disinformation and influence operations with not enough evidence, scientific evidence, whereas those computational researchers or information IT researchers will show those data without enough background knowledge about history and politics. So we have to try to put them together for better understanding of disinformation and influence operations in the country. And some of the researchers are too closely aligned with the government. But as I said, there's this somewhat anti-governmental faction in the country, which is targeted by authoritarian influence operations. So, we have to be careful not to align ourselves too close with the government in order to avoid labeling. And so, finally, we need to have better interdisciplinary research as well as cross-border cooperation, especially because driving a wedge between Japan and its security partners is one of the biggest purposes of those authoritarian influence operations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Ichihara. That was a really brilliant insight into the kind of the recent realization of the importance of research around disinformation in Japan, and also how actors are seeking to exploit existing divisions within society there. So I'll have a couple of questions myself, and then I think we can go to the audience. So audience, please start thinking about questions. Actually, I'll go back to you, Professor Ichihara. You talk about the China-related actors. Who are they? How would you characterize who they are? And also, are any of them that you would see actually based working in Japan, or is this coming from the outside in, if that makes sense?
Well, yeah, thank you. That's a really important question. Well, based on my research, together with some other researchers outside of Japan, we found that China has been changing its tactics on influence operations, and from some certain time, China started utilizing Chinese diaspora very massively who are in Japan. And I especially focus my research on information influence operations on the media outlets, and found that there are diaspora media which were established in the 1990s, that which became cooperative with the CCP. And some of them spread very outright propaganda from the CCP. And some of them manipulate the information in a way that, for example, newspapers, news articles on China talks only about cultural contents, whereas news about the United States and South Korea talks a lot about political tensions with Japan. So in such a subtle way, they do not necessarily spread disinformation, but they do try to manipulate information. And there are indeed actors outside of the country as well, and they mostly try to influence via Twitter and YouTube. But they are so far, I would say, not too influential in the Japanese discursive space, because anti-China sentiment is pretty strong in Japan, so they are not too well trusted.
Thank you. Eliot, I've got a question for you. You talk a lot about resilience and community, and you've done some incredible work establishing facts and accountability. But it's really difficult work, and you did talk about it there. The people doing this, the kind of the trauma, the type of images that they're seeing, it's really tough. And you have protections in place to help people avoid sort of the vicarious trauma. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because it's really challenging work that people are doing, and it takes a lot of specialist skill.
Yeah, it's an issue I've been aware of really since the early days of my work. I heard anecdotally, back in 2014, the impacts vicarious trauma had on various NGOs, often because they didn't take that too seriously, and because these organizations were used to having people on the ground in these war zones experiencing stuff firsthand. When they started hearing some of their staff were having problems after viewing this imagery, it's not something they took seriously, and that actually led to some very serious consequences for those organizations and for the individuals involved. So always at Bellingcat, it's been very important for us to create this kind of atmosphere where people are free to talk about that. We have psychological support. We make sure that's provided for free as well. When we're training volunteers, we make sure that that's also part of the training. What has concerned me a lot over the last 2 years in particular is the increasing engagement people have with social media content from Ukraine and now Gaza that shows relentless traumatic imagery. There is an issue that kind of emerges with some people in that they feel that they're obliged to witness these things, that because they feel so powerless, the one thing they can take that is giving them an element of control is being a witness. The problem is that's a self-reinforcing cycle, because you expose yourself to more traumatic imagery that worsens those issues, that requires you to witness even more stuff. And that can have very, very serious consequences on people psychologically, and in a very slow and subtle way that people don't really get. That, combined with our ability just to spend the entire day scrolling through this kind of stuff, can be very psychologically damaging for people. And that's also why at Bellingcat we produce articles about this. We make sure we have regular podcasts where this is a topic that comes up. I talk about it a lot in my own work as well, because it's one of those things that most people aren't thinking about when they're looking at this imagery. They don't have any experience with trauma, and vicarious trauma in particular. And I think that can present a real risk to communities. And it also creates a situation where often the people viewing this content are already part of specific political camps that see themselves in opposition to other political camps. And that just reinforces that. And that when you're in a situation where it's increasingly hard to know what the truth is, and there's very loud sides on either side of a topic and screaming at each other on the internet, can actually also reinforce those structures and lead us further away from establishing what the truth is and actually attaining accountability for these terrible things that people are viewing. So it's something that I think anyone working in this area has to be very aware of.
Thank you. That's such an important issue. I'm